Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Welcome to the Visibility Project podcast.
Started by a group of citizens in a small Michigan town with a like-minded goal
of increasing the visibility
of the unseen and unheard populations in our community.
Our guests will share stories and insights
with the goal of increasing our awareness and knowledge
of various aspects of diversity and equity
to create a more connected, empathetic, and inclusive community.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
So let's get to work.
So, let's get to work.
Let's get to work.
Welcome back to the Visibility Project podcast. I'm your host, Jeremiah Lee. Spearheaded by the members of the Cultural Awareness Coalition, the project is the brainchild of several organizations and individuals with shared values who sit on a project steering team. We hope that the podcast series creates a deeper empathy for others and serves as a catalyst for people to actively create a more inclusive community and world. With Great Lakes Bay Pride Month in June, we will be speaking with 3 guests on the topic of LGBTQ+ youth. We want to encourage support for Pride Month. You can learn more at greatlakesbaypride.org. Today, our guests are Andy Grossmeyer and Madi Brooks, who are a couple, and Amy McDonald, who is a therapist with expertise in support of LGBTQ+ youth. Andy Grossmeyer is a non-binary, transgender, and pansexual individual who uses he, him, and they, them pronouns. He recently graduated from SVSU with a Bachelor in Arts in Sociology with minors in Gender Studies and Psychology. In the future, they plan to get their Master of Social Work to further learn about and help LGBTQ+ individuals. In his free time, he enjoys reading, watching cartoons, and hanging out with his cat, Beans. Madi Brooks is a non-binary and pansexual individual who uses they, them pronouns. They're planning to finish their bachelor's degree in business management at SVSU, while still trying to figure out what to do in the future. They are working as a florist designer at a small business in Midland, Michigan. They have always been passionate about the LGBTQ+ community and will be pursuing that passion in the future. Amy McDonald is one of 2 American Association of Sex Education Counselors and Therapists certified in the Great Lakes Bay, Michigan region. She is currently the Counseling Services Director at the Shelter House of Midland. Amy is also working at Connections for Mental Health as an outpatient therapist. As a therapist employed by Family and Children's Services, she developed and ran 2 LGBTQ+ psychoeducational support groups for teens and adults and provided counseling for individuals and their partners. She was instrumental in the formation and development of Gay-Straight Alliance student groups at high schools in Midland County. After spending a career in advocating for victims of abuse, Amy strongly believes that openly discussing sexual health will lead to stronger relationships while mitigating sexual abuse and trauma. Well, welcome, Amy, Madi, and Andy. I'm so happy for all of you to be here today. So I want to start off, though, with maybe Madi, since I've known you the longest. Can you just give me a little bit more tell our audience and listeners a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. My background is, well, I'll keep it in relation to what we're going to be talking about today, but I am the second oldest of 5 kids. I am not the only queer kid in my family, and I have super accepting parents. I haven't graduated college yet. I was a part of many sports teams. I wrote down bullet points. I didn't write down any completed sentence ideas, so that's all what I got.
No worries. So, and you're here today with Andy, and you 2 are in a relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Andy, I know we haven't met in person because of COVID. We're only met on video several times now. But Andy, could you give us a little background on yourself too?
Yeah. I guess probably like the biggest thing in my life right now is I just graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology. And I have a couple of minors in Psychology and Gender Studies. And I like to joke around about how I majored in like LGBTQ, like I majored in gay basically, because I mean, that's what it's focused on. But yeah, I identify as non-binary. and pansexual, and my pronouns are he, him, and they, them.
Thank you so much for being here, Andy, and congratulations. That's awesome. So I know we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you're thinking about a master's, so that's huge accomplishment. So congratulations.
Thanks.
And Amy, can you just give us a brief background on yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm a therapist here in Midland. I'm the new counseling service director at Shelter House. That I recently started that, and focusing on LGBTQ has been kind of my life for the past 10 years. And a big focus, I developed the Compass groups, which were psychoeducational support groups, the first of its kind in Midland. And I'm excited that they're still going. I left Family and Children's Services, but they're going to carry on that curriculum and support for the community. And I'm looking forward to bringing in some new groups, which I can expand on later here at the Shelter House in support of the LGBT community.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today, Amy.
Thanks for having me here.
So Maddie, I'm gonna start with you a little bit more to dig a little bit deeper. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your identity, and then also what it was like for you coming out to family and friends?
Yeah, I identify as a non-binary person. I'm also pansexual, which is a recent development in my life. I started figuring that sexuality out around sophomore, junior year of high school, and that was never really a problem internally with me or externally with any of my family or friends. I was friends with a lot of very accepting people, and my family, I wasn't the first to actually come out as queer or anything like that. My brother was actually the first one. So when I came out, it wasn't really to anyone's surprise. And then switching over to freshman year of college is when I started to explore my gender identity. And that was a trip for sure. My friends were accepting, but needed to do some research and different identities and stuff like that, and had to learn how to use they them pronouns instead of the gender classic she her and he him. My family, on the other hand, were not as easily accepting. My mom she says that she didn't see it coming and that it really surprised her, and it's gonna be hard to get used to it, but she said that she was going to try, and she has been since, which I love and appreciate her for that. My siblings, most of them were younger than me, so they took on to it pretty quickly. My littlest brother, he was like, I think 9 when I first came out to him, and he jumped on the opportunity of being able to use something other than she, her all the time, and he, him all the time. The real trouble was with my dad. He didn't jump on the opportunity very quickly. He was actually the first person I tried coming out to, and he did not take it very well. He didn't talk to me for a month after that.
Wow.
We have smoothed things over, and I think he is trying a little more. He's at least using my preferred name instead of my legal name, which is super wonderful, and I appreciate him for that.
Can you talk, and thank you for sharing, Maddie, and can you talk a little bit, maybe what are some struggles maybe you've encountered as someone who identifies as non-binary? Is there, I mean, beyond just maybe your father's trying to get used to it, can you talk about maybe some struggles you've encountered?
Yeah, the most common struggle that I've encountered is being misgendered all the time. People still assume that I still use she, her pronouns because I am feminine presenting, which is understandable. That's the gender norm that society has put on us, but it's hard because I don't want to correct everyone that I meet, because then that becomes a long conversation of me coming out to every single person that I meet, and that is not something that I want to waste my energy on all the time. Other things is just honestly just not having a gender neutral place to go to the bathroom in public. That sucks. Other than that, I haven't experienced too much, but I don't go out too much.
I can hear how it could be, I hear you, and can see maybe how it could be exhausting when trying to constantly feel that burden of having to correct people and explain that can be tiring, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Well, thank you for sharing, Maddie. I'm gonna jump to you, Andy, and can ask the same questions. Can you tell us more a little bit about your identity? I know you touched briefly on it, and then also about what the experience is like for you coming out to family and friends.
So Maddie and I kind of have similar timelines with that. My like figuring out my sexuality was a little bit later in high school. It was more towards like junior and senior year. And I kind of joke about it because I didn't really like have a crush on a specific like I had a boyfriend at the time and I was like, oh, maybe I'm like not straight. And there wasn't a specific person that I was like, oh, she's really cute. I was just like, women. And then I just kind of was like, yeah, okay, I guess I'm like bi. And then me and my boyfriend broke up, as high school relationships do. And I came out to my mom and she was basically kind of like, well, you just broke up with your boyfriend, so I think that this might be like something that's just as a result of that. It's probably not you actually having these feelings. And so she was kind of like, just keep it on the down low. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then I went off to college and I met the first like person who was non-binary that I ever met. And I was just like, oh, that's really cool. And at the time I was still kind of like exploring like sexuality a little bit because I was like, I like bi is good, but I might not be bi. And so I was just kind of like exploring different like gender and sexuality identities. And then I kind of realized one day I was just like, oh, I don't think that it's just me being interested in non-binary identities. I think that I am non-binary. And then I slowly started coming out to like my family and they were pretty accepting. I think that the biggest thing coming out was kind of like when you come out as non-binary, in like my experience, and I know that Maddie has had this experience a little bit too, you come out before you have your identity fully developed. And so kind of what you're doing is just saying like, hey, I have this thing that I think that I am, and I wanted to tell you about it because it feels really like crappy having this secret inside of you, because that's what it feels like before you come out. And so you come out and sometimes it's not fully developed. And that's how it was for me coming out as non-binary. And so I came out to my family and they were kind of like, well, what do I do with this information? I was like, I don't know. I just thought that you should know. And they're like, okay, well, just like keep me updated with any updates that you got. I'm like, okay. But it's been going really well. Since then I've developed some stuff, and obviously like I'm going by some new pronouns now and I'm going by a different name, and they're doing really great with that.
That's really good to hear. I'm glad that they've been receptive and as your journey, as you're learning and growing as well. And I appreciate that they're accepting of that. So I'm gonna before I jump to you, Amy, I want to maybe take a pause and I think often there's misunderstandings arise from when people are not speaking the same language. So sometimes I feel like a level setting is really helpful. So I'm gonna maybe ask this to the three of you then, like, how would you all define both non-binary and then also how would you define pansexual for our listeners? So I'll open it to all three of you.
I'm going to jump at the start of that one.
Okay.
And the way that I have described it in the past, disclaimer, I've been describing this to children, not adults. So this is how I've been describing it. And it's that gender's a spectrum, just like sexuality. You got the male on one side, you got the female on one side. And non-binary for me is either in the middle or completely off the spectrum and it's just not there at all. That's how I've been describing it to like kids, but you guys can do more official.
That's great. That's helpful, Maddie. And I'm glad you have to explain to kids and that it's helpful, right? So Amy, and what are your thoughts here on them?
Yeah, I was letting them talk. I don't have an official definition, but for non-binary, for me, it is a lot of people are born male, are male or female. That's their identity, not their biological sex. But there are some people who are not male or female or identify as male or female, and that's non-binary. A lot of times terms used are non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer. And that's the definition for me. And some of those words get thrown out and people get confused. But for me, it is, they're not male or female. They're in there and they're all of it. And they can be. I mean, if we're being honest, and we don't always need those labels, if we look at the spectrums of our identity, then our biological sex and our expression, if they're on a spectrum, none of us are in exactly the same place in every way. I identify as a female. My haircut would not be particularly long, and those type of things. So we look at where we're at and how we identify ourselves. Non-binary individuals say, I'm not any one, and I'm all of it. So Maddie had a really good, not either or, just all of it or none of it, right? So it's complicated, but it's not. It's just who you are, and it's how you feel, and it's made up of how you feel internally, your expression, and then biologically. Sometimes those things are the same, sometimes they're not.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And the term pansexual as well, that's come up for maybe, can you clarify for our listeners as well?
My understanding of it was, definitely it was a term that was thrown out in the beginning, and people made jokes about kitchen appliances and random things. Really what it was sort of funny, but sort of annoying after a while, because it was like, you're hiding behind humor, but you're not acknowledging somebody. Pansexual individual for me, just identify a romantic or sexual attraction towards people. And it's not based on their gender in any way. It is, I'm attracted to this person, and their gender has nothing to do with my attractions romantically or sexually. Maddie, Andy, is that correct?
Yeah, you described that pretty spot on for me.
Yeah. I think that, this was a huge topic. I mean, it still is in the general LGBT community about pansexual versus bisexual. And I think that for me, at least, the big distinction between the two is that bisexual can mean, so we've established that there are multiple genders. There's not just 2 or 3, there's lots of genders. And bisexual to me can mean attraction to many genders, more than just male or female. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean all genders. But pansexual to me means, pan means all. So it automatically means, okay, if somebody identifies as pansexual, they're attracted to all genders. Whereas bisexual, it can mean they're attracted to all genders, but it doesn't always mean they're attracted to all genders. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think it's really important sometimes to have those definitions for people to have a better understanding, because sometimes just we're not speaking that same language. I'm going to circle back now and talk to you, Amy, a little bit more about your professional background. And can you speak more about what you do in your profession?
Yeah. Well, I identify as a therapist. I recently started as the counseling service director here at the shelter house, and I'm leading a team and working with domestic violence and sexual assault. How that incorporates my past world. We're looking into how to make DV and SA more accessible for those in the LGBT community, how to recover from assault, those type of things, which is important to me as well. I began to work with LGBT, I said 10 or 15 years ago, and I'm not sure how I got here, honestly. It's a kind of a different road, but I know that there were pieces of it. And so I started as a forensic interviewer working with individuals who were sexually assaulted. And then I started to talk about this huge thing that was going on in our world, and how do we talk about sexual assault and our sexualities and our bodies, because we're not. And that was leading to all of these horrific things that I would hear. So I began a program at U of M to be a sex therapist and sex educator. And there I found my people. I found this group of people who were like-minded, wanted to use language that I was familiar with, but there was so much language I didn't know, and so many other individuals that I wasn't supporting. And so I took that knowledge and I came back and I was looking in our community, if you were identifying as LGBT or you were a parent and your child was coming out, there were very few places you could go. There were very few people that you could even talk to about this sort of thing. And people were turning to the wrong people, to the wrong institutions. And people started talking to me, and and I would talk to parents and say, we need to do this. And then I looked at data in our community. The Legacy Center had done some research about our youth in the community, and the numbers were really high. If you've never seen some of the research, it was showing like a 14% depression rate and a 12% eating disorder. All of these things that they identified in our youth, in our schools here in Midland. So I took that data and then I said, let's compare that to what the HRC has, which is more national, with identified LGBT youth. And I was showing the comparisons. I said, we're not doing enough. And they're here in our community. You just don't see them. And so from that, we started the Compass groups, which became psychoeducational. We had teens and adults. And with the teens, they were there to be themselves, some education, coming out, how to better advocate for themselves. The adults, same things. Also within that was interesting. We had parents come to the adult group and sort of learn from other people. So that was really a really strong, a really good group, sort of my baby. So I miss it a little. And so here at the shelter house, what I want to do is we're going to start Intersections, which is an LGBT group for those who were survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or any kind of domestic violence assault that can be from family. And come here in a safe place to talk about who you are in the intersections. You're not just a survivor, you're not just pansexual. All of those things will be a safe place for you to learn and heal. So that's sort of my journey, kind of fast.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And and it's really exciting what the programs you're launching there at Shelter House as well. I think that's really needed, and maybe too often.
Thank you. We'll be doing a few launch parties this late summer once we can get together, I'm hoping. So I'm watching the numbers, and then we'll hopefully start our more of a curriculum based or structured in the fall. So I will get advertisements out to we can meet and kind of gather and talk about who might be interested in the group and what direction. So
awesome. And so I'm going to circle back. You mentioned the Compass groups. Maddie and I actually went to one of your Compass groups before, a couple of years now, way before COVID. But can you dig a little deeper into the Compass groups and what do you do for the LGBTQ youth and their parents, and what do you feel the impact is on them?
For the kids itself, it was, as someone said earlier, when they came to Compass group, especially when we were face to face, they were, let's be honest, they were loud in the lobby. And they got even louder in the room. And, and I never silenced them. I wanted to hear their voices. I asked them to keep the hard swears down because, we've got other people. But when they got there, they said, Amy, we can be gay now. We can be gay. And so that gave them a place to be gay. It gave them a place to be who they were. When we talk about, why did I start Compass? I told you about the data, but what really gets me excited and passionate is the authenticity. And I love being a therapist. I genuinely love people. I love your stories, and I love the real you. So that is exciting when kids are authentic, and they're just, sometimes they're moody, sometimes they're annoying, sometimes they use language I've never even heard of. I'm still trying to it's canon, but I don't know what canon is, but we'll talk about that later. So these weird words that challenged me, and I love that. And so that's why. So they were able to do that, be authentic. And if they were safe at home, they could learn how to better advocate for themselves and not be angry. Maybe listen to their parents for a minute, not changing who they are, and give them some time to swallow what had just happened and then begin to heal. And for the parents, it was a place to say, I don't know what your other therapist or friends have told you, or even sometimes your religion, but I'm here to tell you this is kind of who your child is. And this is the data, and this is the stats. And we all have those numbers on how many LGBT youth attempted suicide. I think it was in 2020, over 700,000 youth under 24, according to the Trevor Project. The data comes from everywhere. It's 19% of all LGBT youth attempted suicide in 2020.
It's incredible.
Those numbers are dramatically reduced when you have supportive people. And I don't, Maddie and Andy talk about they have people who were supportive, at least it learned. And that's really awesome. And we need more families like that. And if they don't have biological families like that, we need to create communities and other loving families who help support and grow people.
Well, thank you for that. And I can feel your passion for supporting these youth. And certainly back to the statistics, one statistic that I think is really important too, it's very similar, is that, in schools for youth aged 14 to 22 who do not have a gay straight alliance in their schools, that's peer support group, 33% of LGBTQ youth from age 14 to 22 attempts suicide or contemplate suicide, during that time period if they don't have that peer support group. And that number drops dramatically, still way too high. So I believe it's 16% when they do have that peer support group in their schools. And Maddie was instrumental in helping develop that at the university where I work. And we kind of, but Maddie, they were the ones that wanted that and made it happen. So kudos to you, Maddie. I mean, do you want to maybe talk about that for a quick second, or?
Can we circle back to that in a
Yeah,
minute?
yeah, absolutely. We'll circle back to that in a bit. So I'm going to then shift gears. Thank you so much, Amy. I want to shift gears to talking a little bit more about Maddie and Andy, your relationship. So first and foremost, how did you all meet?
We met on TikTok, which is an app. It's like a video app like Vine. And I just saw so there's this For You page that like kind of matches you up with like, it shows you videos that the app thinks that you would like. And basically Maddie showed up on my For You page. And I saw that in the comments, they mentioned something about like a coffee shop that was like a local coffee shop around here. And I was like, oh my God, is that like the coffee shop like here? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, let's like go out for coffee sometime. And they were like, yeah. And then we added each other. And I actually messaged them first. And I was like, hey, you're really cute. Like, yeah. And
I can see on video Maddie's blushing now.
They didn't respond to me because they were just like, it just went over their head that like there's lots of people, you interact with lots of people on TikTok and you're like, oh, you're cute, and then like nothing happens of it. But then I was like, this person is like local and they're very cute and I want to go on a date with them. And so I was like, I have to be more direct. And so I was like, hey, do you want to go out on a date? And I was like, it doesn't have to be a date. It can be a friend date, but we can like go out on a date. And they were like, yeah, how does tomorrow sound? And I was like, okay. And we went on a coffee shop date and it ended up lasting 4 hours. We went into the coffee shop, sat there for a while, went out, walked around, went back to the coffee shop because we didn't want the date to end, got more coffee, and then walked around a little bit longer. And then we were like, okay, I don't think we can show our face in there a third time. So we're going to have to end the date. But like, this was fun. And I mean, the rest is history. We moved in. We moved in together.
We U-hauled it.
Yeah, we U-hauled it. We moved in together before our 6-month anniversary. And that's like a gay trope of like moving in way too soon. But hey, we've been living together for like almost a year and it's worked out great.
That's so awesome to hear. And I love the way you met. It's just it's the way people meet now. It's just different. Things are different, especially during COVID, right?
Yeah.
I love that you kept going back to the coffee shop. I also wanted to just jump in, and I love that you used word U-Haul. I don't know if we have to define that, but I do want to tell you, if you waited 6 months, a U-Haul is 6 days. So
yeah,
you are fine.
No, okay.
I've had people who've been 6 days. So you're fine. 6 months, that's like a lifetime. So you were very patient.
Thank you.
Well, I'm learning new terms today too. So that's new to me. So six days is the norm. Okay, all right.
Sometimes it's one day. Oh no.
Interesting. Getting a little more serious then. So is there some? I'm guessing, is there a lot of things that are just normal day to day? But do you think there are some things that are different because of your identity?
Oh wait, yes, absolutely. We wake up in the morning and go, sheesh. That's just a joke for our younger viewers out there.
Okay.
More of a serious note. Okay.
I love that when you said about canon and using that Amy, you didn't know what those were, and that went right over my head too during you. And I know that listeners can't see it, but just
they both broke down laughing. I can tell that this episode is definitely about LGBTQ youth because I feel my age here too.
Irma, did you write it down? So
I'm going to write a definitions here. I need like a spreadsheet of terminology.
I just noted all casual and then look cool the next time I talk to you. Yeah.
All right. Sorry to interrupt. Please continue about so.
I feel like the biggest thing that is different is just like having to, because it's this really weird thing coming out to people that you just meet on a day-to-day basis. It's like, is it worth coming out to them? Like Maddie was talking about, like, is it worth telling my whole life story to them when I'm gonna have like a 5-minute interaction with them? And also you kind of have to like, there's this thing that you have to do, that you have to like look at somebody and don't like making judgments, but you kind of have to, because if you don't, then you don't know, like you have to judge if they're going to be accepting or not. Or honestly, like I look at somebody and I'm like, are they gay in some way? Are they like queer? Because if they are, there's like an automatic sort of understanding that you have, and there's like some tells that you can have. Obviously you can't judge somebody by how they look completely, but like there's some tells that you can be like, I think that this person is gay, or like at least an ally and accepting. And then you can be more relaxed with them, and you can feel like you can sort of bring like your pronouns or your sexuality up in the conversation. Whereas like if you look at somebody and you're like, yeah, they're probably not LGBTQ and I don't know how accepting they are, you kind of have to play it like, you kind of have to play a role of like, oh, I'm cis and straight as much as possible, because otherwise you don't know what's going to happen, especially with like somebody that looks very old-fashioned with their views. Because if you don't play your role right, then you might get hate crimed in some way. They might just, it's a very small chance, but like they might make comments or they might look at you the wrong way. And so you kind of have to be like, okay, this person, I don't think they're accepting. I have to look straight and cis for them. Whereas with like other people, you have to, I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you are LGBTQ in some way, like you have to look at somebody and determine right away, like, am I safe with this person or am I not?
That seems daunting at times. I feel like you're having to.
It's definitely an extra step at the very least that you have to take. But I mean, sometimes it is a little bit dangerous. I mean, when you're walking around outside and you see like a group of guys, you have to kind of like, I mean, sometimes when we're walking outside, I have pepper spray and I have to like make sure that I have my pepper spray, not because like, I mean, I guess doubly because sometimes sometimes we're perceived as women. And so, if there's a group of guys, you might get catcalled or something like that. But also if they see us holding hands and they immediately go, okay, these people are queer, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's so. Have there been times that you've experienced like discrimination either at schools or home life or in a community? Like, I mean, you mentioned you have to carry pepper spray for this just as a precaution, but has there been instances where you've had these situations?
I mean, yeah, one time we were walking outside and we were holding hands and there was this car that drove by and they were like, there was a guy in there and he called out, he's like, are you guys gay? And we were like, yeah. And then he like yelled out a slur at us and we were like, okay, and it made us really uncomfortable. And it made us feel like unsafe, obviously. And it took a second to like shake that feeling off. Now we can kind of joke about it, but like still when we go outside, it's scary because it feels like that could happen at any moment. And so like if there's a truck that drives by when we're going out for a walk, it's still scary. Like if there's any cars that go by, I'm a little bit uncomfortable.
How did you react in that situation? Like immediately after and like right at that moment and then and since then? I mean, how have you reacted? How did you react?
In the moment, we kind of were just in shock and we just kind of like looked at each other and we were like, okay. I don't know what to do now. Like that was
tried to laugh it off a little bit.
Yeah, but we were both like really uncomfortable, and we were kind of like, that was the first time anything like that's happened to me. And then after that, I don't know, like I just think that there's this sort of distrust that we both kind of have now with like the general public, especially when we're just outside and we don't know who is, like when you see a car driving by, you don't know who's in there. So like I was talking about earlier with having to do that, like looking at somebody and being like, okay, are they safe or are they not? You can't really do that with a car because you can't immediately see the person in the car. So just all cars are uncomfortable, like them driving by us. We're like, I don't know what's going to happen.
You know, we sometimes talk about privilege and when it comes to race and other things, but I have the privilege of never having to have to and be concerned or have that feeling of having to judge people. And I feel that's something that I'm privileged that I don't have to do. And it pains me that you both have to experience that. Amy, I'm going to ask you some questions here. Like, how do situations like this and how do individuals not being able to be their authentic self impact them both like physically and then as mentally as well?
Yeah, just listening to Andy talk, there's trauma there, right? That's, you can hear it. Every time a car comes by now, the fight or flight is kicked in. And so that feeling on itself is trauma. But then the other part that they were talking about was I have to determine who is safe and who is not, and kind of scanning the room every time always puts you on guard and puts you in this mode of kind of playing a role, at least for a protective standpoint. And what are you holding back then? Your authenticity of who you are, what you really want to say. You know, I talk to couples, and when they're first coming out and they want to, it's really crummy for me. And then it's also happy when we say, okay, so you're going to take your partner and you're going to go on a romantic weekend, go to Traverse City, go to Saugatuck, because they want to like hold hands and they want to kiss. And I can't say that if you did that in the Great Lakes Bay, you would always, and I can't say you'd always be safe in those other communities. But what I do want to say is that keep looking though. There are lots of people speaking up, making it more comfortable, trying to make the invisible visible, right? And making it safer to say, we're all in this community, all of the diversity that it is, and that you can hold hands. And that's why it's important to have, I don't want to say safe spaces because that annoys me. I want everything to be a safe space. I want it to be safe. First off, I love hearing the love story. I can't get enough. I want to hear more of it. I just love it. And I want to be able to say, if my husband and I went to Grazie for dinner and we said, oh, it's our anniversary, people might be like, oh, that's cute. I want the same thing to happen for every couple, and that feel that power to do that. And so that's where authenticity comes in. Authenticity to be a loving couple, to be yourself. It's important. And when we don't have it, we have rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, all of those things. We can have a better community of stronger people if they're allowed to be their authentic self.
So in particular, I mean, we've done a previous podcast on LGBTQ issues and particularly transgender, and we worked with perceptions. But for LGBTQ youth, we talked about there's not being your authentic self. There's trauma there. There's when you're dealing with people in public, there's a lot of things that are there. What areas of support do you think that LGBTQ youth need the most? And that's Amy, you as a professional, and both Maddie and Andy, both as you as individuals too. And maybe you, Maddie, this is maybe an opportunity to talk about the SAFE group on campus as well. And what areas of support do you think that LGBTQ youth need the most then?
Regarding the SAFE group, LGBTQ youth, I feel that we really thrive when we have, unfortunately, a safe space, not unfortunately, but using that term, when we have a safe space that where you can go and like just unmask from daily things and just be your authentic self. I've really thrived off of that, and I know a lot of other people have too as well. When I started at Northwood, there was, I believe, an LGBT club a year before me that never panned out. And I went through, I think, my first 2 years without it. And then the end of my sophomore year going into junior year is when I started the group, and we called it SAFE, and it was
Sexuality advocacy for everyone.
Yeah.
Whether we pen that in my office together, right?
Yeah. It was just wanted somewhere where the very small minority on Northwood's campus could gather and feel a little better, like more so that they're not alone, because I did feel that way for the longest time at Northwood. And even after starting the group, it's not as if everyone jumped at the opportunity to join. A lot of people that joined were my friends and different allies that I've had throughout my years at Northwood. Just having it, I feel, made everyone on campus that is an LGBT person just feel a little bit better, even if they didn't join the group. And I feel like that's what a lot of the LGBTQ youth need at most schools, communities, etc.
Great. Amy, could you maybe touch on this a little bit too? What are your thoughts on why it's to address these for youth in particular?
Yes, for youth in particular, I think like Maddie had said, knowing that they're not alone. And so when we look at even at our high school level, I'm excited to say in our community, Midland High and Dow High had started a Gay Straight Alliance. Bullet Creek has also started that, and Bullet Creek is actually really thriving. At least it was before the pandemic. And Meridian was talking about it and had like a friendship group. So they're pushing the narrative of you're not alone, you're safe here. There are others who are in your community. And that's important because often when I'm talking in sessions with individuals one-on-one, they're like, well, I'm definitely the only gay person in Midland. And they're sure of that. And they're not. And I can't just tell them you're not. And they'll say, oh, I didn't know that. But finding others. So for what we can do as allies and other people, making ourselves visible, talking about including everybody in on the things that we do. That's really important. And after a while, being gay is the least interesting thing about somebody. They're just part of our community and doing the things that we do. So that's important. So what we can do is include, ask questions, remind everybody that they're welcome here. For others who may identify as part of the community, speak up and be visible. I think that it's important to do that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one thing I do want to highlight, in June is the Great Lakes Bay Pride Fest. So I see Andy there dancing. So why do you all feel that Pride Fest is so important to the LGBTQ community?
I think that, like, personally for me, I mean, obviously it's a great way to, like, for people to be visible and go out and, like, celebrate who they are. But also I think that it's a really great way to initiate some conversation with family and friends and be able to just, like, it's so hard in everyday life to bring up sexuality and gender in a natural way. And that's what makes it so hard to, like, at your job or at school to be out, is that there's no real good way to just be like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm gay, because it feels like it's so out of the blue. But Pride gives, like, a chance to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to Pride and I'm, like, excited to, you know, celebrate my identities, and oh, I'm, like, gonna get this Pride flag because I already have this Pride flag. And so it's just a really natural way to just be, like, talking about an event, and then it leads into conversations about identity.
Awesome. I know Perceptions does such an amazing job with that. Can Amy or Maddie, what are your thoughts on why is it so important and how does it help?
Kind of talking about visibility. So I don't know if you all remember, this year's been a blur, but last June, it was Gladwin and Beaverton who were able to, during the pandemic, had a Pride celebration in June. While, you know, the rest of us, the Pride events were too big in Bay City and Saginaw, I know that. It was nice to say that there are LGBT in Gladwin. And there are, because I know many of them, and it felt good to hear their voices. It was covered by the paper. And I think it made people really think that it's, you know, it's in our community, and it's wonderful, and it's something to be celebrated. I think that any time that we get an opportunity to say, we're here, we can't be silenced, and that's what pride is, it's important. Because like Andy was sharing, you don't always, it doesn't come out naturally, but it's important to say and be visible. So I have that outlet to do that. So
awesome. And Maddie, any thoughts here?
And it's just fun.
It really is. I'm going to be there myself. I go just about every year. Maddie, what are your thoughts?
The only thing that I want to add to it is my experiences going to Pride is that I always see people there that I never expected to see. And I'm always pleasantly surprised. And almost every year that I go, I come out with a new friend, which is awesome. Like the perfect reason to go. It's to meet new people and learn about other people that share experiences with you.
I'm going to go. I'm an ally, and what can allies do to support Pride Fest or support more in general? What can allies do to support more?
I think the easiest way to do it is just to say your pronouns when you're introducing yourself. I think that that's probably the easiest way to initiate that conversation and to show that you are an ally. And honestly, like, if you're not super comfortable with doing that, you can just ask pronouns and, make that kind of like a question rather than just like oh yeah, this is something that I do, because sometimes it can come off as a little bit like cheesy if you're just saying your pronouns. But yeah, most people who are trans, at the very least, they're not going to get upset or angry if you ask their pronouns. Most people love it when you ask pronouns, as long as you are not singling them out in a group and just being like, what are your pronouns because you look trans. You just ask the whole group, like, hey, just introduce yourself with your pronouns, or ask the whole group what their pronouns are.
So we're a little short on time, so I want to ask, what would your final message to our listeners be? I'm going to ask all three of you, what would your final message to our listeners be?
I just want to say, being supportive of everybody around us is like the simplest thing we can do. Even more than that, taking another step is helping everybody be their authentic selves and grow into these beautiful, strong people wherever we're at, is what I think we ought to be doing. And so let's keep doing that. I mean, gay and non-binary, all of these things, they're not new, by the way. They've been around for millennia. We're just having a hard time in recent history of accepting things. So continuing to love everybody and help each other be their authentic selves is the only way that we're going to have communities where everybody can walk around hand in hand, feeling comfortable, loving, and being themselves.
Thank you, and I wholeheartedly agree. Maddie and Andy, any last thoughts?
Honestly, I would probably just say, ask for pronouns. I think that pronouns are the easiest way to show that you're an ally, all LGBTQ people, and it can help trans people and people who are sexual minorities, like everybody in the LGBTQ community. It just makes you feel immediately more safe with that person. Like just at the beginning, as I was talking about, if somebody asks me for my pronouns, I immediately can look at them and be like, okay, they are safe.
I want to leave this with two things. The first thing is, if you don't know or you want to know, the simplest thing that you can start with is picking up a book and just reading about it. Try to educate yourself, and if you don't know, maybe you could find a reference. Someone could refer you to a book or some sort of educational means. And the last thing I want to leave everyone with is just to remain open-minded, because your own biases, they're just gonna hurt you and hurt other people before anything else. So you just need to stay open-minded and just be willing to accept whatever life throws at you, whether that's in your own family or your friend's family or in a group of people that you've never met before, however it is, because anything can happen.
Yeah, you just listen and learn.
So I listened and learned today from all of you, and I just want to thank all three of you for being here today. And it's been fun, and I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode as well. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You can stay connected with the Visibility Project by subscribing, liking, and sharing on your favorite podcasting and social apps. Look for us at the Visibility PRJ.
Financial support is needed to keep the conversation going. Go to midlandfoundation.org/give and select the Cultural Awareness Coalition Endowment Fund to be part of the project. Note podcast in your donation notes.
Thank you for listening.
We see you.
We hear you.
And together, we are making a difference.